All right, everybody, welcome to another Perceptive podcast here on the channel. We are streaming this E3 week, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of people kind of busy following other news. But we have another great developer cast lined up today. My guest is a returning one who has been writing about games, talking about them, and recently released the game An Airport for Aliens Currently Run by Dogs, which is definitely, I would normally say that is a very long and unusual title for games, but I cover indie games, so this is just like another Monday for me. So, please welcome to the cast, Xalavier Nelson. Hopefully I didn't butcher your name too badly there.
No, Xalavier Nelson Jr. Hey, everyone. Nice to meet y'all.
It is great to have you back on. As we were just saying, we last spoke when I was on Twitch. That would have been at least like 3 years ago. And of course, after 2020, that pushed everything like another 5 to 10 years back. It's been like at least 20 years since we last spoke.
Yeah, we're all sporting a Gandalf beard. We are the post-apocalyptic survivors of an endless set of nightmares. And it's nice to see that despite the horrors that we've all faced, people are surviving. They're making games. They're making games they never thought that they would make, and they're building the foundation of their next future. So I am very excited for what the next piece of video games will look like, because I think we're prepared to do something really special. And I'm really hoping, just in terms of the personal pain that's occurred over the past year, that we're going to have a lot of people having their comeback moment to really redeem everything that's happened.
Yep. And An Endless Stream of Nightmares, I think, is a great summation of 2020 right there. But I know that you are limited with time, so let's get into our discussion. To begin with, like I said, the last time we spoke, it was many, many years ago. So for people watching us live or recorded who don't know who you are, could you talk a little bit about, what your background is and what do you do?
Hello everyone. I'm Xalavier Nelson Jr. I'm a studio head and narrative director working on both my own projects at Strange Scaffold, as well as with a bunch of different developers around the industry, including Tendershoot of Hypnospace Outlaw and Glass Bottom Games of Skatebird. You might know me from my writing work on such games as Hypnospace Outlaw or Skatebird, but I've got dozens of titles under my belt, including the recently released An Airport for Aliens Currently Run by Dogs, Can Droids Pray, Reigns Beyond, Den and Job. If I had to list the number of games I've gone on to, it would take all day. But I've had this really interesting career transitioning from journalism to games writing to narrative design to narrative direction and creative direction, and heading up a studio. Recently announced at this E3 is the fact that we are making a supernatural neo-noir third-person shooter, a spiritual successor to Max Payne, called El Paso Elsewhere, as well as the fact that I'm a creative director on a Playdate title, Recommendation Dog with Sweet Baby Inc., about being a very tiny dog with a very big job that involves managing a gig economy. So that is a fraction of the shenanigans that I'm attached to these days.
I guess that takes me to this first question then for you, because I know you were asked about this on Twitter. Like, do you have any clones, or how are you working on so many projects at the same time?
I think as much as I would like to claim clones or having the secret of eternal life or something like that, I think, just to be perfectly honest, it's just a measure of different priorities than a lot of the typical attitudes I see voiced in video games. There is an emphasis in terms of my production process, in terms of what I make with my collaborators and the designs that go into our games, that specifically enable me and my collaborators to make a whole lot of stuff with an unprecedented level of stability while we're making things that would traditionally appear to be vast risks, like making a game about trading human organs in space world organ trading simulator. So yeah, no magic bullet there. It's just a lot of very, very talented and good people that I work with. And we have set priorities that specifically allow us to bring more things into the world as opposed to spending 4 or 5 years trying to craft a magnum opus.
Mm-hmm. And when you start working on, I think, so many different titles, I think this is something that I see from a lot of indie developers who tend to either kind of compartmentalize and or kind of focus on one specific design, or they kind of go for the scatter shot. I'm willing to do a lot of very different experimental stuff. And like with the titles that you worked on, I've been looking at some of the footage that you put out, some of the trailers. I mean, they are completely different games. I guess, how do you approach that kind of switch between working on something like an airport to the noir game to Organ Trader and so on?
For me, it's just the natural way in which my brain functions.
Mhm.
I There is something very daunting about essentially being locked in a room with your own work, and the obsession and terror of needing this one thing that you're working on to happen to release on the day in which it will succeed, get the attention that it needs, etc. It is honestly, I would go so far as to say that it's poisonous. It is strangling for creativity to have every single project be the one that decides whether or not your career continues. So I'm very emphatic about bringing compelling things into the world in a focused and sustainable way that, yeah, again, allows us to bring more things into the world as opposed to making a magnum opus. I emphasize a quality control in the midst of that. That means that we aren't doing game jam games. I think game jam games are great and they um, are necessary for our industry's continued growth and evolution. But I do think that they are necessarily limited. We aren't making those. We aren't making games in a single month, but we are looking at what does this game need to be the best version of itself given our resources, and
Mhm.
we figure out what that thing is very early in the process. We make it, and then we move on to the next thing.
Yep. And I know we are limited in time tonight, but I could spend like the next like 2 hours like talking with you about kind of that struggle of being an indie developer, especially when you are working on smaller projects. And like you said, when you're not betting your entire livelihood on a single game. Because we have seen many developers try that, and the majority of them unfortunately fold when that game doesn't, do the millions of sales that they were hoping for.
Yeah, it's the thing that distresses me about this trend is not just that it's a trend at all, but that the uh, field that we're looking at, the real key for me at least to the issue that we're facing, is that we are steadily removing the space for games that do okay. So a
Mm.
game that doesn't light the tills on fire and doesn't hit the new and trending list or the Steam bestsellers top list, but it sells okay at its launch and it just continues to sell a few copies here and there every day or every week, and it forms a part of a larger portfolio that a developer has. Publishers approach their portfolios in this way. They know that out of the 10 games that they sign, the vast majority of them, if not all of them, might just do okay. But if just one game is a hit, all of the rest of those titles are inherently paid for. Indies and the increasing, I think one thing that we've seen this E3 week is this increasing polish uh, barrier that's just being moved up and up and up. We're seeing teams of even very small size working on projects with budgets of 5 million plus. And when you're operating on those budgets with those margins, with that level of dev time, 3, 4, 5 years
Yeah.
with multiple people, all of whom might have families, it means that we can't just have games that do okay and then you move on to the next thing. It means that your career, your studio, your IP is constantly in risk. So I do advocate more as I see where the winds are blowing that indies actively investigate a perspective that is more akin to publishing than traditional quote unquote development. Not one title, but several.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you do have your bets spread out, that does mean that there is less that you can put into a single game, true. But yeah, as you mentioned at the start of the question, there is this immense opportunity to ensure that everything you put out does justice to itself, but doesn't have to carry the
Way of the entire
fortunes of your entire
studio.
career around it.
Yeah. And again, you are killing me in terms of these topics. I want to spend like the next hour talking with you about them. But
The last thing I intend to do is murder you, and I am so sorry.
but it is such a big point. I think this will also be a good segue in talking more about an airport next. But like the amount of indie games that I cover, like I do weekly indie streams on Wednesday where I just play nothing but indie games, and then those get turned into videos that are at least 6 games apiece. So, like in a single month, I can cover between 30 to 36 completely different indie games, and that is
And
nothing.
that's yeah, like we can get between 10 to 30 titles releasing on Steam in a day.
Yeah, and like you said, and what we've seen is that the idea of, quote unquote, just okay games, games that we know they're not going to break, 500,000 copies sold, or we're not expecting them to be on the top 10 games of the year. That for a lot of developers out there, it's almost a fate worse than death. Because, like you said, and what we've seen, a lot of developers go all in on their games, and some of them deservedly so. Like, if you're working on a unique idea or a unique concept that nobody's ever seen before, you could hit that out of the park, and everyone dreams of being the next Darkest Dungeon, or Stardew Valley, or Five Nights at Freddy's. But it's, as like Shark has said, it's kind of like you're winning the lottery while getting struck by lightning, 5 times in a row. And it's becoming increasingly harder for these just okay games to kind of thrive. I mean, when I play games and people are asking me, is it an amazing game? Do you hate it? I'm like, it's just okay. Like, it's not a game that I'm going to remember 5, 10 years from now, but, I'm enjoying
And
it.
I think one important thing to clarify here is that we aren't just talking about just okay games in terms of quality, because some of these games are like even
Yeah.
good to great to excellent. The idea is commercial performance, because you can have,
Yep.
again, a great game that launches on the wrong day and
Mm-hmm.
and is at the very least, if not torpedoed, at the very least they are massively undercut in terms of the potential that they could have. I think a really good example of this in last year is Going Under by Aggro Crab.
Oh,
Aggro
yeah.
Crab's Going Under launched the same day as Hades. Had a lot of the
Mm.
same narrative innovations, is an excellent game, is a game that is doing well, but the heights that it could have reached, and then I'm sure its publisher believed in, and the developers reached in a world where they launch their big
Mm.
narrative-based roguelike the same day that Hades
Mm.
1.0 drops, is the type of the stroke of luck that like people fear. And what I
Mm-hmm.
want is a future in which developers don't have to fear what if my game gets announced the same day that GTA 4, 5, 6, sorry, I have to count up.
Yeah.
That same day that GTA 6 gets announced, am I dead? I want developers to have a future where that doesn't have to be the case. And I see in terms of overall industry trends that we are in fact just moving further and further in that direction, however. And it's heartbreaking.
Yep. And it is very difficult to, as you said, like to succeed in this industry. You can have an amazing game, But if you do a bad job in marketing, or you hand it to the wrong YouTuber, or like you said, release it on the wrong day at the wrong time.
And I think the important thing here, again, sorry to interrupt you, is just like the key here is not the key word here is like there also isn't the case of wrong here. Like you could do everything
Yep.
right and still fail is the nature of being a part of a creative medium.
Mm-hmm.
But and the less that we acknowledge this truth, the more we even set up inaccurate standards of like what success means.
Yeah. And it's one of the things I try to really push with my game development and design articles, that I don't shy away from the fact that you can, as you said, you can literally do everything right and your game still fails. Just as you can do everything wrong and your game could become, the next Among Us or the next Goat Simulator or Fall Guys, or any game that just kind of, and when I say this, it's kind of with air quotes, just appears out of the blue. Like the game that just one day nobody knows about it, the next day everybody does. But that really doesn't happen, I think, as much as people, wish it were to happen.
Yeah. It is, and this is another reason why I push for a portfolio um, perspective when I talk to developers, because when we are discussing, you know, what how well a project can do or has to do, um, the idea of there being like, no, you did everything right, it just didn't work out. I think that is it's a shame that we don't discuss that perspective more. Everything is either a success or a failure. And I know that businesses certainly don't think in those terms. You even have people like Ubisoft who will take a title that is quote unquote failing and continue to support it and turn that into a success. They have the resources to and the marketing and the firepower to transform a game's appearance or its IP into something new. And the more indies can use that versatility that comes from being small, the better. But I do see a push from a lot of levels to make the games bigger, to make the launches hit more platforms at launch, more languages at launch. And I do have major concerns about the overall effect this will eventually have on our industry as we stare down the barrel of, okay, you spent 4 years making a 7 out of 10 game, and it's shipping to all of the major consoles plus Stadia on day one because you need to cover that many bases, and it's shipping in 4 languages. Sorry, 8 languages, 16 if it's on Apple Arcade,
Mm-hmm.
and you had to go through that localization process. It's all come to this moment.
Yeah.
That isn't an environment that allows for a game to just do okay, to just break even.
Mm-hmm.
I want developers to be able to break even and have that be a success.
Mm-hmm.
I want developers to have the freedom to make games that are. I'll say this might be a controversial perspective. I want developers to have the freedom to make games that are bad. Because if you look at any significant artist, from people from Picasso to Martin Scorsese to your favorite musician, they have songs, albums, movies, entire decades of their work, which are underappreciated,
Mm-hmm.
underrated, only appreciated in hindsight, or straight up bad. Like you look at it and you're like, that was a Picasso?
Yeah.
And the fact that, and the thing is, because their careers last long enough, they get to make things that eventually emerge into the pantheon. Or they get to release things that are idiosyncratic and eventually have this portfolio, this filmography that shows such versatility and promise that you get to pull entirely different things from the perspective they have over the years. On the other hand, if you look at the Moby Games page for the average developer, they have maybe 2, 3 shipped titles. We don't also have the ability for developers to have the longevity to produce bad things so that they can produce their best things.
Yeah.
And that is another thing I think is essential.
Oh yeah. And again, we are like having these like simple conversations, but like each one of these is like a good hour, 2 hours easily. Like if we really had the time tonight. And yeah, and I really do like. I know we're doing this as a shortened cast, especially with E3 going on, but I definitely want to do a follow with you about kind of talking about this room for failure because I think that's a very important conversation.
And I'm happy to have it. It's something that I at least know, and I'm going to be very forthright about this. I'm not the only person talking about this. There are other people who also see the danger here. It's just also, it sounds weird in a world where everybody is making games that look a certain way or trying to hit a certain target, or even talking to publishers to say, we have prepared this game to be able to do poorly. Like, no one wants to come into a conversation with a publisher and say, yeah, this could do badly, but it could also do really well. Even though we all know that in the back of our heads, what we're actually doing is this elaborate amount of theater to obfuscate it. And I think the more honest we are in several respects about just how much of our industry comes down to dice rolls and maximizing the amount of dice rolls you have and the trust you can have with partners to disclose these dice rolls while also preparing for the best. I'm not advocating for mediocrity. I'm advocating for adjustable standards of success to enable long-lived careers, long-lived development cycles that truly can, in the process, change the way our industry is assumed to function.
And it also, like you said, it gives developers that kind of safety net to explore these ideas. Because so many developers are just, they are one, just okay or just one outright bad game away from having their studio closed down. And it is very scary out there for a lot of developers.
I also think it encourages a certain amount of, what's a good word for this? I think that what we're one interesting thing that we're seeing during E3 is how much it does also encourage like similar tracks of design to be explored. This week we have seen about a good 8, 9 Left 4 Dead successors, and I love Left 4 Dead. And you can see the business case for Left 4 Dead. You're looking at repeat play. You're looking at the business strategy of how many people can this get through the door? How many people can it retain? What is the cost and quality that you can reach for the budget that you're putting in? There's every reason in the world to make a Left 4 Dead alike, but when everybody is also kind of saying like one of the only ways to hit this budget point and to make the type of game that we want to make is to make a Left 4 Dead like, you end up with an E3 where we're inundated with co-op PvE shooters. I'm stoked to play a wide variety of them, but I also acknowledge there's going to be quite a few that do less well than the others. And for some of those studios, doing less well means death.
Yep. And it's the same, or it's very similar to the MMO bus of the mid-2000s. Everyone saw World of Warcraft and said, hey, let's do World of Warcraft. And what ends up happening is that all those studios who were banking on even making a quarter of WoW's numbers, they failed. And they're like, when, as you said earlier, when we start talking about budgets in the millions, dozens or hundreds of people working on a game for 3 to 5 years, you either have a success or you have nothing. And there's no real room in between for a lot of these studios.
So to be a bit open about how an airport for aliens currently run by dogs has gone, especially in terms of reception,
Mm-hmm.
it's done really well. Everybody who plays it or touches it seems to really like it. The sales have also done well. It hasn't been a mega hit,
Mm-hmm.
but it also, but like everything how should I put this? An airport for aliens can run by dogs, despite whatever illusions people might have looking from the outside, has not been a mega hit. It's been played by a lot of cool people in terms of streaming. Thousands of people have both played it, bought it, watched it, advocated for it, and we're so thankful for all of that. But it is not the type of thing that supports a team of 8 to make their next game over the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so thankful not just to have brought life to this specific game, because it is a joyful and enthusiastic utopian universe, in a real world that can often feel like a dystopia. But we get to like look at how the game did, both creatively, where we executed on exactly what we wanted to make, and then some, and are really proud of that, and commercially, and we get to be like, yeah, making that game was worth it. I don't have any regrets looking at Dog Airport game and seeing that it did not sell as many copies as Hades. And I recognize that that is a vector of privilege that we are allowed due to the perspective that we take to our games. And I honestly want more developers who, like, some of my favorite games went beneath the radar, especially being a journalist and having access to more games, covering more games. I'm sure you know the same struggle, and you've seen a game you adored and it just didn't light the tills on fire.
Mm-hmm.
I It's kind of heartbreaking having conversations with my favorite developers and seeing how many of them, for even games that you would recognize and think, man, that must have done really well,
Mm.
to look back upon some of their best work and see it as a failure. They can't feel good about it because, it didn't allow them to actually pay the bills. Uh,
Yeah.
and and both players and developers deserve better.
Mm-hmm. And oh my goodness, you are still trying to stab me with all these topics in terms of these conversations.
Just
Because
making space to come on later.
yeah, you're giving me like fodder for a number two and maybe even number three guess with you here, and yeah, and like you said, like going back to this kind of the illusion of success when it comes to the game industry. Like I'm really glad that you said that with an airport that it's doing well, but it's not, you're not all retiring off of it. Because a lot of developers and a lot of people who cover games tend to only, focus on the amazement or that, yes, this game is doing amazingly well, it's perfect and everyone should buy it. And then I see it has, less than 1,000 reviews, or, maybe like people who are covering the game, maybe they're only getting like 300 views on their videos on it. And like we've said, it's important to understand that not every game is going to be Darkest Dungeon or FTL or again, pick any or Hades, as we said earlier. And I think both as consumers, you need to understand that in terms of your expectations, and as developers, you need to realize that yes, this is a great game. You may love it, but you shouldn't be taking 2 or 3 mortgages out on your home in order to finance its development.
It is perhaps the least sexy thing
Yep.
you can be preaching, but that's where I'm at. I want to guarantee that I can bring more things into the world as opposed to having one thing that is perfect. And I respect those who do not have that same perspective, while still acknowledging the degree to which it allows me to invest in titles emotionally and otherwise, that it would otherwise be unfeasible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, an Airport for Aliens currently run by dogs is a game that could have easily, especially because we saw the interest in it. I've seen games like that take 5 years,
Yep.
6 years. We made an Airport for Aliens currently run by dogs in about a little over a year and a half, and it was a sim ship on next gen, to which it is exclusive, and PC.
Mm-hmm.
That is, for me, those are the vectors of success that I'm thinking about these days.
Mm-hmm.
Ideas of types of games that can be produced, and even just like production strategies, definitions of success, where we can be like, you know what? The game didn't do all that well, but we didn't have to wait 6 years to find it out. So,
Mm-hmm.
hooray! Everybody gets to go for ice cream.
Yeah. And like the unsexy side of game design sounds like that could be its own podcast title right there.
Yeah, I would probably do better in multiple perspectives, preaching success or saying that even like something like an Airport for Aliens currently run by dogs did better than it did.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that transparency is important, especially considering how much attention our release got and so on and so forth. We we planned for the best and we planned for the worst, and we got something really good, and it is and that mindset has allowed us the freedom to bring better things into the world.
Mm-hmm. And I know you have about 8 minutes, and I'm glad that you mentioned how long it took you to make an airport, because like you've said, and some that we've seen, that there are developers that they will spend years chasing an idea. It may be a good idea, it could be a bad idea, but they will spend so much time on this concept, whether it's because they believe so much in it, or they just are trying to learn the skills while trying to make it, that it becomes almost unfeasible for that game to even come close to, supporting or bringing the money that it needs to, given the amount of weight that developer puts on it.
Yeah, it is. It's very understandable, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
especially if we see something grabs a hold of a popular imagination, whatever else, we then want to make the biggest and best version of whatever we're making. Um, the games industry does not trade in bunts, to use a baseball terminology. And the yeah, it's a race. It's a race like anything else, and I will never criticize people who do end up pursuing that dream or that perspective wholeheartedly. But I will constantly be offering alternative visions of success, because I think that the actual uh, even need of accomplishment for a title to hit is far less than what we make it, and the amount of um,
Mm-hmm.
time and energy we spend representing only the biggest hits, or only the developers who pushed against anything and everything. Like we go for success stories, right? Underdog stories, and it does this. Sometimes it goes well, and sometimes it does us a disservice. We just have to have other ways of talking about and evaluating games, and that's why I'm excited that podcasts like this exists, because it gives us forms of conversation that we wouldn't otherwise have.
I mean, that's something that I hear from a lot of developers who come on. Like, after the cast is over, they'll say, it was really great having a transparent talk about what we do. And it's something like, as I was telling Xalavier about earlier, like when I do my presentations at libraries and schools, that it's something there needs to be more conversations about. Because when you obscure kind of what success means in this industry, it leads to people believing that I can work on one game for 10 years and, that will pay for all my bills and everything. And then what happens when it doesn't?
It isn't an advocacy for pessimism, it's an advocacy for allowing yourself the bandwidth to have a game that succeeds
Mm-hmm.
on terms other than the purely commercial. Uh, this is especially relevant, I think, for art games, of
Oh,
which there
yes.
are an increasing number, and they are super rad. And the conversation around them is, if you'll excuse my French, fucked up. Because we look at an art game and it might even transform the industry, but then we look at how many sales it sold,
Mm-hmm.
how many sales it had, and it's considered a failure.
Yep.
That's also heartbreaking.
And and the problem that we said is that you can have that emotionally rich, very unique game. If it doesn't sell commercially, no publisher is going to touch a similar game. As we said with the Left 4 Dead
Yes.
example, that I can tell you exactly why people are making Left 4 Dead likes. The answer is World War Z. And World War Z was a surprise. Nobody expected that game to do that well. So now,
Especially with a license.
yep. And I'm sure you know Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. Like that game, it was a critical reception. Every developer who saw that game loved it, and it bombed. And
The funny thing is, it actually didn't bomb, especially as far as how it's gone today in terms of the platforms it's available on, how it's
mhm,
done commercially. If you look at how Where the Water Tastes Like Wine does now, it's still one of the most successful indie games of the
mhm,
past, decade. The thing is, the early conversation around it was that it bombed.
mhm,
Therefore, we talk about it as a bomb in every instance afterwards. And if you're trying to get a game, like the structure of the game is so juicy and rich and interesting because the conversation around it is one of a bomb.
mhm.
Yeah, try to get that funded. Get your Where the Water Tastes Like Wine funded by a publisher. It's not impossible, but it's much harder than even getting an Among Us alike funded in terms of publishers. I would dare say that it's harder to get a Where the Water Tastes Like a Wine like game published than a Among Us like game, even though the chances of an Among Us like game doing anything like Among Us
Yep.
numbers since Among Us exists is virtually non-existent because one has a track record of money and visibility and conversation of money and visibility, and one doesn't.
Yep. And I could, wax on about kind of what I see with the adventure game genre, with trying to pull in more numbers and kind of grow that market. But we do unfortunately not have the time to get to that.
Mm.
And I guess very quickly, just in case we can't get together again really soon, could you talk at
Mm.
least very briefly about what your other projects are, like Warlord Organ Trading? That's another great title. And
Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator.
there
Yeah.
you go. And the other one that you announced as well, the non-passo one,
So, Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator is the sci-fi body horror market tycoon game that you didn't know that you need.
which I kind of do
You
need, I think.
exactly you buy, sell, and trade organs in a strange and evolving universe, um, and end up altering the universe due to your commercial exploits. Uh,
El Paso.
El Paso Elsewhere is a supernatural neo-noir action shooter, a classic throwback third-person shooter in the mold of something like a Max Payne or a Die Hard trilogy. You go to this motel in El Paso, Texas, that gained another 46 stories yesterday, all below ground. It's haunted as heck, and You need to fight your way through it, floor by bloody floor, to stop your ex at the bottom, your abusive ex, who also happens to be the Lord of the Vampires. We're
Mm.
doing things that have a commercial basis and justification. We're very careful about not making something that's so out there that no one could identify with it. But we're also able to take weird left turns, like giving El Paso Elsewhere an original rap soundtrack, because I don't have to go to a publisher or to another entity and justify the game's existence. The only people who need to believe in the game are the team and themselves. And if we believe in the game, at the very end of the day, at the very least, no matter what happens commercially or critically, we know we can be proud of what we've delivered.
Mm-hmm.
And what it isn't just another Max Payne. And I'm so glad that I can say that about a game I'm making.
Yeah. And I know we are right at time, so my final comment, excuse me, I'll get my voice dying, is that, as I'm sure you're well aware of, like, the beauty of these games that are just okay, or even the games that are bad, is that there's often, kernels of greatness. There's often something worth exploring with them that I think for people who only cover, 9.5 out of 10 games, the five greatest games of each year,
For the games that have hit the Steam bestseller list
yeah,
for a couple of weeks.
they miss out on something amazing and original. And if you're trying to learn design and trying to build your own games, it's good to look at games that go off the beaten path. One of my favorite games was, I think it was Universal Fishing or Galactic Fishing. It was like this sandbox fishing game where you just explore the universe fishing in random lakes. And again, it's an idea that no publisher would touch that with a 5-foot pole. But it exists. And it's a great game if you like that kind of design. And if you only cater towards, the top 10 games of each year, you are leaving, there's so much room to experiment. Like you said, with
You're
an
also
air.
leaving money
Yep.
on the table, to be
Yep.
frank. Not to extend this even further, but I'll just say very quickly, there's people like you who played the Universal Fishing and adored it, even though it didn't hit the bestseller mark. Your take on Universal Fishing could be the one that makes 1 million copies sold.
Mm-hmm.
And you would never know that if you hadn't both experienced that title and put yourself in a position to take a chance on something in that genre, even though it does not have that proven money spigot that another genre might present.
Mm-hmm. And I looked it up. It was Intergalactic Fishing. That's the actual title for that. And hopefully my phone will stop ringing. There we go. And again, there has to be room for this stuff because, like you said, with an airport, that it's not going to sell 20 million copies. But there are plenty of people out there who do want a game like this. And, they're not expecting a 500-hour live service, support for the next 10-year project. They want a game where they can go to an airport and, pet dogs.
Yeah, like we could even make a successor to
Mm-hmm.
um or a sequel, something that utilizes the structure of airports. Because one, the technology is already paid for.
Mm-hmm.
We've already built that game. Um, so we can extend it, change it, build a different experience out of the bones of it. But also, yeah, like we don't have to look at it as a failure and be like, God, the last thing we need to do is make any game like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just got asked then, would a sequel be, a train station run by cats?
No, I think a sequel would use the same structure and emotional potential of airports, but would be substantially different in terms of theme. Um, which is there's the other side of this, which is success.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, where if an airport for aliens currently run by dogs had been a mega success, working on it for the next not working on it for the next 3 years would be seen as a stupid choice and a failure, which is also not unrelevant.
Hmm.
So getting yeah, making a train station for cats. We have the freedom to not build a train station for cats, but build something that would be unexpected given the foundation, but still delightful because of how we make video games.
Hmm.
The motto for the unofficial motto for Train Scaffold is better, faster, and cheaper. And because that's the way that we can make better games in a more sustainable and healthy way than has currently been conceived or put forward by the wider industry.
Yeah. And again, if it works, or if you are able to make a game that is uniquely yours, and you still have enough money to work on your next project, that is more of a success than a lot of indie developers can say.
Yeah.
All right, and again, even with this cast, like we're still over your time. I know you have to get going, and I definitely want to, do that second cast like really soon with you about talking more about failure because, I am holding back a lot of conversations right now. So before I let you go for today, do you have any, final thoughts? Anything you want to say to the fans watching? The floor is yours.
Thank you to everyone who has supported and is supporting an airport for aliens currently run by dogs. We're really proud of that game brought to the world, and we're so glad to see that it connected with so many of you. Um, Wishlist Skatebird, which is coming out August 12th. Release date was just announced. Wishlist an El Paso Elsewhere, which was just revealed, coming out in 2022. And Wishlist Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator, which is the sci-fi body horror market tycoon game you didn't know that you needed, and is coming soon, TM.
Hmm. And yeah, I really do like the idea of a Space Warlord, and it is a game I didn't know that I wanted, and now I do. All right. So, Xalavier, again, thank you so much for coming on. If people want to follow you, do you have any social media links, anything you would like to mention?
At Rit Nelson, WRIT Nelson. Oh man, I'm getting my other meeting call.
Okay.
That WRIT Nelson, and we also have a Patreon where you can, among other things, get your dog or cat into El Paso Elsewhere as a painting on the walls of this horror motel. And that's at patreon.com/strange scaffold.
Awesome. All right. So, I will let you go for today. Again, there's so much more we can talk about. We'll chat more on Discord and email. But best of luck with your next meeting and with your upcoming games.
Thank you very much. Until next time, take care, everyone. Thank you.
Yep,
Bye.
take care. Yeah, I'll let him get to his meeting, so we'll wrap things up for today. I'll be back on later tonight for our regular game stream, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where is in the art and science of games. Be sure to check out our Discord and Patreon link down below, and if you are a developer working on an upcoming game and would like to talk about it, please get in touch.